So to kick this conversation off, I would love for you to tell us the story of your first encounter with the Plywood community.
Yes, this is actually one of my favorite stories because I went to school in Georgia State University, so pretty close by. And there was an internship at the Tabernacle Music Venue, and I was like, wow, that'd be a really fun opportunity. So I signed up, got my internship, and one of the very first events happening that summer was Plywood, and I had never heard of you guys before, but I saw the lineup, and I was like, oh, I think I would love, to be a part of that. So I signed up for the event, was working it, and I was actually taking tickets at the door, like scanning people in, doing very internship-like things. And it was so inspirational to me. I think I was there when Ron Clark was there, and I saw his whole presentation, and I was like, man, these are a lot of really cool people with really good ideas. So it was really inspiring to me on my journey. My life journey.
That's incredible because that was probably 4 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And now you're here on the Plywood Present stage, which is just so fun.
Pretty insane.
So your work has come a long way, probably since those internship days.
Absolutely.
And so I'd love to hear, what were some of the first creative inklings you had of Oh Happy Danny, of your work as an illustrator, as an artist? Tell us some of those beginning pieces.
Yeah, so I've been illustrating all my life. Like, I took an art class in middle school. My teacher was like, it looks like you're tracing, so we're not going to give you A's on everything. And so because of that experience, I didn't actually pursue art necessarily, but I pursued design all my life. When I went to college for business administration to major in hospitality, I was like, oh, event planning sounds actually really fun. So I went in that direction, but always was still drawing. And once I, made the career transition and was working for myself, still doing design and marketing and things like that, I picked illustration back up as a hobby. And this was literally December of last year.
Wow.
For Christmas, I got an iPad, and I was like, oh, this is fun. So I was drawing for fun, and I've always been one to talk about the hard things. So illustrating was just another medium to do that, and it's been super crazy to watch how it's transformed and taken on a life of its own.
Yeah, well, I love hearing that you were illustrating and drawing and creating for such a long time before a lot of people knew you as Danny, this artist, or Danny, this illustrator. And so I'd love to hear, do you have now, and we're going to get a little bit into like your current working season, but do you have rhythms for creating and illustrating now, or has it always just been this side thing? Can you tell me more about that? Like,
about
what are the
illustrating
rhythms?
in and of itself?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, now it's become like a huge part of my life, but a lot of it is sparked and inspired by, the current events and the current climate that we find ourselves in, especially related to racial justice. And so it's different for me when I witness an injustice or something hits close to home as a Black woman, and I'm like processing through it, but also a medium to process through is creating and is art. So for me, my illustrated infographics are pretty complex, but it's not just me trying to jam a lot of information into one image, but it's more like I need to process through this entire concept, this entire idea. I'm either grieving through something like it, or I'm just needing to break it down more for myself. And in that, I'm able to help other people who may want to understand something a little better too.
Wow, that's cool to hear that it's both like an internal process and an external creation that you get to share. So can you tell us, over the past few months, your work it's taken off on Instagram. I was following you before those things have happened.
Yeah.
But what has that been like? What's that felt like? What have been some of the challenges of having so many people interact with what sounds like a personal process for you?
Yes. So, first of all, wild. Completely. It was January when I had maybe like 750 followers. It was my friends and family, and I was totally content. I was also, along with designing and marketing things, I was also doing social media strategy. So I was working with other brands and mission-based organizations to help them like up-level their social media presence. So I've known of strategy and things like that, but never in a million years did I anticipate what happened. What I think was, I started in January when I did an illustration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote, or not really a quote, but about Martin Luther King Jr. And his impact on society, and how sometimes I feel as though his overall message can be a bit watered down or misunderstood. And so I wanted my first piece to kind of speak to that, and that was in January, and I posted it, and it was the first piece I saw being shared outside of my friends and family. So I was like, maybe there's something to this. And I wonder if people would be more inclined to listen to the hard things if they were pretty. So Black History Month was the next month, and I just went and did so many different illustrations. I talked about seeing in color. I talked about microaggressions. I talked about all sorts of things. And my pieces started to make its rounds, and I got to maybe like 10K, and I was like, this is crazy. And soon after, we witnessed the tragic death of Ahmaud Arbery, and it was all over the news. And I made a simple graphic, and it just says, exercising while Black should not be a death sentence. And that was the first piece to go viral, like actually viral. And ever since then, it's just been a stream of a lot of people who want to come learn more about racial injustice, learn more about the complexities and nuances of this conversation and how they all have a role to play. And so in 1 week, I saw 300,000 people join me on Instagram. Still insane. Still have never seen anything like it. But along with that, I felt an increased responsibility to not only draw these pretty things, but to say, hey, you actually can do something in your sphere of influence to make a difference. And sharing a pretty picture is just not enough.
Wow. Okay, I have a question that I didn't prep you for.
That's fine.
But it's something that I personally, as I do my own work around racial justice education, it's something that I've been wondering about. And I'm curious, how do you... So doing anti-racism work in education can be exhausting. Doing it as a Black woman can be, I mean, on multiple levels, can be even more exhausting. And then also you're stewarding this platform and this responsibility to this community. And then you're also trying to like stay sane and probably hang out with your friends and see, you know, do normal stuff. Yeah. And there's a global pandemic, you know, so it's a lot.
A lot is happening for sure.
And I'm wondering, how do you stay centered, if you do, and then how do you continue showing up in really public ways, continuing to create art and serve this community? Like, how do you not balance these things, but how do you navigate carrying and being responsible for so many spinning plates?
Right. That's a great question. So faith is a big part of my life, and it's a big anchor for me. So a lot of times when I feel like things are getting out of control, I like to center myself with my faith and my relationship with Jesus. But also, when it comes to all that's happening, I do my best to kind of filter and funnel information. I talk a lot about when someone is first coming into contact with this huge conversation of race, how it's great to start out with general knowledge and trying to get your bearings, but then make sure that you are getting more specific, getting more topical, and finding the way that you can use your purpose to align with, you know, the cause and the conversation. So for me, it's still a little widespread because I still talk about everything, but I definitely try to keep my focus on what is relevant, of course, what is happening right now. So I'm listening to that, and then I'm also listening to what my community, what my audience are talking about and processing through. So it's one thing to say, like, oh, that was a headline on the news today, but then it's another thing to say, this is how this community is trying to process through this information, and this is the problem, and this is the solution. How can I help bridge the gap between the issue, the conversation, and the solution? So that's a lot of what I think about when creating a piece. It's not just like, yeah, it's trending. It's like, here's a solution that I'd like to present and active steps to get there.
Yeah, that's so good because it's so tangible. So it's like there's a million opportunities, a million ideas and possibilities, but you're able to say, I'm trying to help people have these kinds of conversations to lead to these kinds of outcomes.
Exactly.
And that's really brilliant. One of the words we talked about prior to this conversation was artivism.
Yeah.
And so can you talk about that because you are so passionate about it?
Yes. So artivism is not a word I came up with. I found it when interacting with artwork from Spanish communities, Latino communities. They actually were the ones to coin the phrase, artists in their day. And it was meant to illustrate the connection between the power of art and the power of activism and how putting them together can really help you accomplish a whole different goal. And so for me, one thing that I like to say when I talk about this is that people often pit art and activism against each other.
Interesting.
They'll say art is meant to invoke emotion and make you feel something. And then activism is meant to encourage action and make you do something. But when you put them together, you're actually encouraging action by invoking emotion. You're saying, hey, do something, and I'm going to make you feel a way and encourage you to want to do it because of the way it makes you feel. So I think it's super powerful and something that I think a lot more artists are tapping into in this season especially because it's just powerful. It's just really powerful.
That's awesome. So something that our team here at Plywood, we were talking about just being excited to learn from you. Something we so appreciate about your work is your ability to take big ideas that are really complicated and your ability to distill them into something that people can understand and run with and engage. Can you tell us a little bit more about that process? Like, what does that look like for you? What's involved in taking the big ideas and making them simple for people?
Yes, I can definitely talk about that. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. I kind of already said part of it, but
Sure.
what basically happens is I'm presented with an issue, or I hear about an issue, like I said before, on the news or just in community, and then I'm listening. I say ears to the ground a lot, meaning I'm listening to what's happening, like people-to-people conversations, and I'm saying, okay, here's the issue, like I said, and here's the solution that I want to present. So I sit with it, and I do a lot of research ahead of time.
Okay.
A lot of time, it's more generic research about the issue at large, and if it's ever more specific research to where I'm borrowing, or not borrowing, but kind of learning from someone else's framework, I make sure to credit that. But if it's more just like, here's what mass incarceration is, like it's more like topical sometimes. And then I take that information and I break it down to maybe 4 or 5 bullet points, or what are 3 to 5 takeaways that I would want someone to take away from this idea. And once I have that, then I conceptualize and I say, okay, what would be a cool illustration that everyone would be familiar with that could help them bring the issue home for them. And then I draw it all out. So drawing is literally not to the very end. The bulk of the work is the research and the conceptualization and saying, how can I make this easier to understand but not take away from the power and the strength of the message itself.
Well, I love that, because anyone who's listening could probably do that same thing. Not necessarily turn it into art unless that's their medium, but take the time to research and ask themselves, okay, what are 2 or 3 bullet point takeaways that I want to walk away with from this new idea that I'm learning about? I think that is something that we can all run with.
Right.
Which is really fun. Okay, so I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about you just as an entrepreneur and as a creative, because there's a community of people listening who have ideas and have gifts or have that little thing they've been doing their whole life and they don't know if it'll ever become their job. Yeah. What encouragement would you give to those who are listening who are sitting with something, thinking about it, dreaming about making that thing a reality, but don't know where to start?
Yes, beautiful question. I would say there's a big misconception that you have to wait until you can be fully employed, self-employed by your passion or your purpose before actually pursuing it. And I definitely don't agree. I believe that there's so much things that you can do to fulfill that longing, even right where you are, And so that's one thing that I always want to stress. It's like, don't use how you want to wait till you're fully employed as an excuse to not start. Like, you need to get started. But I would also say a big question that people ask me is how they can navigate purpose and what that means and what that looks like to me. And there's this ancient ideology, I think it started in Japanese culture, but it talks about how purpose is at the intersection of so many different things, right? And so I pinpoint a few and I say it's at the intersection of your passion and your skill set and a perceived need in the world. I feel like if you put all those things together, that's a great way to find your purpose in this season. And so for me, that was, okay, I have a skill set of design, illustration. I have a passion for justice and for communicating about these social issues. And then I see a need in the world for more simplified education about these complex and nuanced topics to hopefully invite the public at large into the conversation. So I put all those together and I said, okay, my purpose in this season will be illustrating infographics and posting them on social media about these topics to help empower people to take action. So I would say to sit with that and decide what that looks like for you and who your sphere of influence is, because we all have things that separate us from other people. And we don't ever have to compare and say, oh, I can't do it like she can. Well, she doesn't have the style that you have. She doesn't have your story, where you came from, and your sphere of influence, the group of people and community that surrounds you. So I would say you have everything you need, honestly. It's just about being willing to explore purpose and take that risk.
What were those 3 things you said? Your style, your sphere of influence, and there was one other one.
Your story.
Your story.
Yeah, what makes up who you are.
Yeah, because that's unique to each and every one of us.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's so good. So what are you learning about running a business in this season?
Ooh.
That's a good question. Because you said you started illustrating in a more serious way in December. That
Yes.
wasn't that long ago.
Not at all.
What are you learning about running a business?
The biggest thing that's on the top of my head right now is that I cannot do everything alone. Hiring was one of the best decisions I have ever made. And part of it is because it does free me up to do more creative things. But also, it does still take a village, in my opinion, to really accomplish a lot of these bigger goals. So hiring is definitely a big one. But also learning how to get organized, not just, with my art. I'm very organized in the way I create, but my space be looking crazy. My business processes, we tried different programs and different systems to really get everything lined up to where I'm working smarter and not harder. So those are the two big things off the top of my head that's really shaped the way I run business now.
Okay. If you could collaborate with one person or brand, who or what would it be?
Mona Shalabi, I think that's how I say her last name. She is an incredible illustrator, but she is a data visualizer.
Yes, I've heard of her.
She's incredible. She'll take numbers and make them look approachable to you. I don't do data visualization. I do concept visualization. I just don't play with numbers. So I think it would be amazing to collab with her one day and seeing how we can combine the power of data and conceptualize something to paint a much bigger picture of an issue or cause. Would that be amazing?
Yeah. Maybe she's listening.
Girl, hit me up.
Okay, my last question for you. One of my favorite things about following you on Instagram is that you do these IG lives and you give the best pep talks.
Oh,
and just encouragement. It's like, after listening to Dani, I have no excuse to not go try the thing.
Right.
And it's in my heart or mind. And so I would love for you to share for people who are listening and they really are thinking, they're like, okay, well, I know my story, my sphere of influence, and I know these things, but I'm still not ready. What pep talk would you have for them?
Well, like I said earlier, I really believe that I would tell someone that they really do have everything that they need. And one of the biggest fears that I consistently hear is fear of failure. Like, I'm not willing and ready to do that thing because I'm going to mess up, or I feel like I'm going to mess up. So I like to tell them, well, yes, you are actually going to mess up. Failure is inevitable. In some capacity, you will drop the ball. But instead of letting that hold you back, I would say let that propel you into actually jumping in and saying, if I'm going to mess up at some point, I might as well go ahead and start now. And it's not to say that your whole journey will be just laced with continuous failure, but it's just not something that should hold you back. And I say, with every failure, create a blueprint, This is what I'm never, ever going to do again. Or this is what I'm going to do better next time. And with that, you're just continuously adding tools to your tool belt. And it's not necessarily like I failed. It's more like I really learned something right there. And we're going to apply that. And I'm never making that mistake again. I just think that it helps shapes who you are and what you want to do so much.
Yeah.
That's what I'd say.
So good. So good. Dani, thank you so much for your time and for your creativity and for sharing your gifts and your thoughtfulness and your work with the world. We are all better for it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was a pleasure and an honor.